it kept him anchored. And so I think that we need to be anchored.
Clear your throat.
We need to be tethered to him. And so we cannot begin to work in the Lord's will unless we are seeing him in prayer, because on a regular basis.
Yeah, well, you hear that music, Julie? It means we're going to hard break so much that you should.
Good morning. I'm Carol Dixon. I'm with Idaho Federation of Families, and I want to welcome you to our March Parent Webinar Series. This morning we have Liza Long, who is joining us, and Liza is the author of a book that was written in 2014, The Price of Silence. It's a mom's perspective on mental illness. Liza is an author, an educator, a mental health advocate, and the mother of 4 children, one of whom has bipolar disorder. She regularly contributes to Psychology Today, The Huffington Post, Boise State University's The Blue Review, and Eagle Magazine. Since her essay, I Am Adam Lanza's Mother, went viral, she's appeared on The Today Show, Good Morning America, Anderson Cooper 360, The Diane Rehm Show, and Dr. Oz, among many other presentations that she's done. The book that Liza has written, I'm really impressed when I picked it up and started reading it. It won just the credibility in terms of the people in the heavies in the mental health field that have acknowledged this book. Dr. Harold Kopowitz, who is the founder of the Child Mind Institute, Dmitry Popolitz, who wrote The Bipolar Child, Dr. Andrew Solomon, who also is a very well-known speaker on mental illness, all kind of contributed in terms of reviews to the book and the credibility of the book. And also, if you look at the bibliography, her area of notes and her index, it's very thick. There was a lot of research that went into this book. It's much more than just a mom's opinion and perspective. It's a well-researched book on the mental health field, kind of what our services are, what's working and what's not working in the field right now. So as we go along, we have our chat box up. I would love to hear your questions that I can ask Liza. I certainly have a series of my own questions, but we would love to hear from the audience of things that you would like to know to understand how Liza has gotten through the challenges with her own family, what she understands about the system, the directions that we're going, and anything that you feel like kind of would be helpful in your own journey. So with that, Liza, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We're excited to have you here.
Thank you so much, Carol. I'm thrilled to be here. I have to say, Idaho Federation of Families has been a big part of support in my family's story.
Good.
So it's great to be here with you today.
Yeah. So tell me, why did you write this book? What was important in your life that you felt like you needed to put a lot of your story kind of back out there?
Yeah, when that blog post went viral, we were right in the thick of a mental health crisis that we'd been living in our family really for about 10 years at that point. My child was suffering. I didn't know how to get help. Like a lot of families out there, I had a ton of questions, and I just frankly wanted answers. That led me to want to understand better the multiple systems that had failed my child and our family. And at the time, I felt like I was the only mother in America who was really facing these challenges. But the more that I researched and talked to people, the more I realized this is systemic. It's across the system, and it stretches from education to our communities to unfortunately, to our jails. So there are so many different systems that come together. And I am, first and foremost, a mom of 4 kids, but I was also in a doctoral program in organizational leadership at the time. And so we study systems theory and organizational leadership. And from my perspective, I thought, wow, there has got to be a better way for these systems to come together and provide meaningful, proactive care for kids like my son. There are so many children like my son who need this help and deserve this help. So many families who are suffering in shame and silence. There has to be a better way. And as I researched the book, I found that there are, in fact, some better ways that we could do things.
Right. So the title of the book, I think, is very telling. The Price of Silence. What is the price of silence?
I think the price of silence is different for every family, but there are also some commonalities. The price of silence is not being able to tell your employer that you're living with a mental illness or that your child has a mental health condition. Imagine if your child were sick and had cancer, you went to your employer and you said, hey, I'm going to need some time off. Your employer would be like, what can we do for you? How can we help you? Your community would say, let us bring you casseroles. All around you, you would feel this web of love and support. It would be a very hard, difficult thing, but you would have that support. support. The price of silence is that for families who have children living with mental illness, that support is not there. In fact, if you do talk about the things you're going through, people will tend to judge you and blame you and say, well, that's just bad parenting, or, you should have tried harder with your child. And that, I think, is really the root of the stigma that so many individuals living with mental illness face, but it extends to families and caregivers as well.
Yeah, 'cause I know with the families I work with, it's a very isolating experience, because often you start losing, your community of support, be it your friends, be it your church, people at work that don't understand. And I think also, to me, the sadness in that even your own extended family,
yes,
a lot of times can be, some are very supportive, embracing, but some also can be very judgmental. And so families end up kind of like just a little island unto themselves, trying to work their way through.
Yes, I know you see this every day at Federation of Families, and I think I was very much in that model. When I wrote the blog post, I'm Adam Lanza's mother, what I was really saying was, in this wake of a horrific tragedy, I felt tremendous empathy with Adam's mother, Nancy. I imagined a mom who had lived very much a life like mine with a son who needed help. I imagined a mom who had tried to get her son help and had failed. And in fact, when the Connecticut Child Advocates report came out, there were multiple times in Adam's young life where an intervention could have helped his family and could have helped him to lead a happy, healthy, productive life. And instead, we have this tremendous tragedy. And, it's hard to connect mental illness to things like mass shootings. We don't want to think that people who are living with mental illness are violent. That's not true. In fact, when they're treated, they're no more likely to be violent than anyone else. But it's that when treated piece that's such a problem for so many families in America.
So I want to bring up to speed anybody who's not familiar with Liza's blog post, I Am Adam Lanza's Mom, is to go online after we're finished with this, Google Liza's name, I Am Adam Lanza's Mother, and that, I'm sure it will pop up the blog post, and you can read what she wrote in 2012.
It was 2012, yeah.
That was an article that was picked up, went viral, and then Huffington Post picked it up, and that's really what kind of launched Liza into this unintended mental health advocate that has really changed your life from what you knew it previously, and it provided a very loud voice from parents in terms of the challenges that parents are facing in trying to get services, and for the community to understand what it is to try to take care of our kids.
Exactly.
So yeah, if you haven't read it, if you're not familiar with it, it's kind of a lot of the context of what we're talking about, and I'd really encourage you to go back and look at that. A lot of our discussion is on stigma, and you have referenced several people in the book, and one of them was Ann Kirkwood. And her revelation, when she had gone to a support group or was somewhere in the community, and she came back and had said that stigma was worse than the disease. Can you talk about what you think Ann meant by that comment?
Well, first, I was just so amazed that Ann was willing to speak with me. She is a stigma warrior, if ever there was one. If you're not familiar with Ann Kirkwood, you should go Google her work as well. She's won a Peabody for an anti-stigma campaign. She's a long history as a mental health advocate and even working for Idaho's Department of Health and Welfare. And I believe that was the context of that remark. Ann and I were discussing how she made the decision to basically come out about living with bipolar disorder while she was working in a high-level position for the Department of Health and Welfare, and there were serious repercussions as a result of her decision to share her family's story. And I often go back to that analogy of cancer. I know I use it a lot, but it just seems so meaningful to me. If she had testified to the legislature and said, I'm a breast cancer survivor, everyone would have probably stood up and clapped, but instead these rumors started circulating, or people started thinking negative things about Ann. She was no different before the testimony and after the testimony. She was the same amazing Ann Kirkwood. But, she's managing her illness, but it's really hard to manage what people think of your illness, if that makes sense. I think that's really what she meant, is that, people living, even with severe mental illness, so Ann has disclosed she had bipolar disorder, that's considered a severe mental illness that really can impact quality of life. Even someone living with severe mental illness, schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, bipolar disorder, major depression, people can manage that illness. They can live in their communities, and they can live great lives in recovery. So that takes a tremendous amount of strength, right? These are people who are survivors, and yet the stigma is what other people think of that, right? And that stigma is pervasive throughout society. If you even were to look at media, for example, films, think about the way that mental illness is portrayed in films generally, right? It's a very frightening, very uncontrollable thing. And so you can't really control what other people think of you. And unfortunately, in Anne's case and in many people's cases, certainly in my case as a parent of a child, that stigma can turn into self-stigma, where you actually believe the negative messages that you're hearing from your community, from your society, from your culture. And I think that's why this is such a key issue for those of us who advocate for families, for children, for people living with mental illness. We have got to get people to understand that this is manageable. It's, it's diabetes, right? It's not this big scary thing.
So it sounds, I can understand someone's desire to keep it private and keep it, because it sounds like it becomes a disability in itself and one that you can't control.
Well, you can't control people's opinions.
Exactly.
About
So
it,
you can,
right?
you can do your own as far as,
Right.
The things you need to do to be in recovery and taking care of yourself, but you can't change what's going on out there. So it becomes debilitating in that sense.
Sure. Yeah. You're not going to get that community support. We joke as moms that mental illness is not a casserole illness. I say that a lot too.
Yeah.
That it's not a casserole illness. People aren't going to let you really talk freely if your child's in Intermountain Hospital, right? That's not going to be a comfortable conversation for most people. And I think we need to move past that and get to the point where, as a community, we understand that these families like mine, we need support, we need love, we need to be accepted. The same way any family of a child with a serious or complex illness would need to be accepted and embraced by the community.
So what are the ways that you would encourage parents to push back against that? And push seems like too aggressive of a word, but
Maybe not.
Maybe not. But it's really, to me, that's the challenging part, because as a parent with a child and then recognizing what the community response is, be it your neighbors, be it the school, but how would you suggest parents to be able to try to broaden, recognizing it might make a smidgen of a change with their child, but it's also about moving forward and making a larger societal change? Any thoughts and suggestions? You went huge. You're, in terms of writing a book, writing the blog, and and using your name is a lot more than what some parents are comfortable with. But within that, there are different increments of what other parents can do.
Yeah, I think it really, first and foremost, starts with that self-stigma piece. And so for any parents who are watching, or even providers, the biggest thing that you need to do is start with yourself. Stop blaming yourself, right? These are biologically based brain differences, and it's not your fault. It's nothing that you did. Moms are really good at blaming ourselves for all kinds of things, right? That's just what we do. But so start with yourself. Stop blaming yourself. And then you have to come to a place where you realize no one is going to advocate as hard for my child as I will. No one. No one's going to care as much as I do. And that's been one of the unexpected blessings, I would say, of the whole experience with Eric, who he uses his real name now, so I don't use his pseudonym anymore. Eric's a remarkable kid, and I always knew that. You know him, he works with you. He's just a remarkable kid, and so even when we were going through some very difficult times, our family story includes 4 stays in juvenile detention, it includes multiple hospitalizations. Even when we were going through all those times, I just knew he was this awesome kid. And if you can embrace the possibilities of learning to really love unconditionally, that's been one of the most powerful experiences of my life, to know that no matter what happens with that kid, I love him, no matter what happens. And I've talked to a lot of other moms who've had the same experience. Your capacity for loving, I don't know, it's like the Grinch who stole Christmas, right? You feel your heart with each episode. Your heart grows 10 sizes until you realize you really do have enough love, not just for your child, but then moving beyond advocating for your child. That love enables you to want to advocate for all children. Right? And I know that's certainly what motivates me, just this desire for people to have the outcomes that Eric's had. And honestly, by speaking up, our story did change. He got the treatment he needed. I know we're very, very fortunate, but our whole family's trajectory changed when Eric got the right diagnosis and the right treatment. His whole life's trajectory changed. I think that's possible for most children and most families.
Well, and also your ability, and I guess expectations might be part of the word, with what you anticipated your future was going to look like, and all of a sudden things shift. and your flexibility of being able to kind of embrace what the reality of your world is, and to be able to go with it. So it's not going to be plan A, but that ability to be like, I don't know what plan we're on, but I'm with my child.
I don't know what planet we're on some days. I'm really glad you brought that up, because my thinking continues to evolve on this issue as I talk to people like Eric. Like Eric and I have a lot of hard conversations. So people like Eric who are living with mental health conditions. Yes, I would say parents experience a sense of loss to some extent. But I would really encourage all of us, since this is something I'm working very hard on, to put yourself in your child's shoes. And what does that mean for your child if you're always grieving the child who would have been or could have been? If you're always expressing that sense of loss. I'm not saying don't go there. You need to go through that stage. Right. It is a stage that every parent needs to go through. But at some point, can't you move past that sense of loss to not even just acceptance, but celebration? And I think that's what I'm working on every day, right? Is saying, yes, this is not the kid I expected to have. It's true story. This is not the journey I expected my family to take. But look at all of the things that we have accomplished, right? And look at all the possibilities in our new existence. Eric is a great kid, regardless of whether he has bipolar disorder, right? So that's kind of the feedback I've gotten from some of my friends who live with mental illness is, we're really sick and tired of our mom standing up and crying, oh, I wish my kid could have been. No, be happy with your kid, with who your kid is.
Yeah.
Right? And for all of us parents, maybe that's true. Maybe we all wish our kids could, who knows. But, accepting is important.
And part of that was somewhere, I think, because there was a lot of hope in the book. And I remember reading this about being present in the moment with where you are and being able to celebrate.
Yes.
And granted, every day is not an easy day, but that day will end. And as you have seen, just some of these magical moments that have occurred as Eric has grown, matured, had access to some of the services need that has gotten to a place of recovery.
Exactly.
So yeah, it's been a challenge, but what you all have accomplished has been huge.
And a lot of that's on him. He works very hard at his recovery. I know a lot of people who work very hard every day at their recovery. For me, thinking about Ann Kirkwood again, looking at what she's done with her journey, this is why we really should be celebrating people who live with serious mental illness. How is that any different than being a cancer survivor? In some ways, it's more difficult because it's an ongoing, thing, right? And yet they continue to contribute to society, to be part of our lives, be our family members, our loved ones, our coworkers, our friends. If you are afraid of serious mental illness, or if you have those views about someone, maybe you should look at yourself and say, what is it about me that doesn't make it safe for my good friends to share? Right, really?
Oh, interesting.
Because we probably know someone, and if you don't know someone personally, you know someone who knows someone who has a family member going through this illness.
Yeah, because the stats are 1 in 5
right,
as far as children have a diagnosable mental illness.
We all know somebody. So I often say that to people. If they're, well, this doesn't affect me, this doesn't affect my family. I say, really? But I did have an aunt who had alcohol use disorder, and I did, my grandfather actually died by suicide, and you say, oh, but mental illness has not been a part of your family story. Okay.
Yeah.
We all have experiences. So.
Looping back a little bit, I think one of the things with this celebration, for Eric and the work that he's done is also the recognition that if he had not had access to the right care that really was able to kind of hone in on what his needs were, Eric would be in a different place.
Yes.
So that idea is that our system really needs to support families in being able to have the interventions, have the treatment, and for it to be the appropriate treatment. Because if you just can, and I think it's what I hear from so many of the parents is that exhaustion with the alphabet soup of diagnoses, kind of the ongoing list of medications, and that things aren't working, and the fear that, oh my gosh, everything we're trying is not working.
Yes. Yes.
So, can you speak to that? There's not a silver bullet, but I know there's
not. But there's so much great new research. That was my favorite part of the book, honestly.
Oh, yeah.
My editor was like, this part's really nerdy. I think people will skip it. But I loved looking at so much of the new science and research that's coming out about mental illness. But yeah, that alphabet soup is exactly right. I think my experience mirrors so many parents' frustration where, I knew as a mom that Eric was having some challenges, probably probably by the time he was 18 months old, to be honest. I could see differences. He had an older brother, and I went to my pediatrician, and she said, well, he's just a boy. He'll grow out of it. And he didn't. He didn't just grow out of it. Things got worse. I'm talking about things like intense fear of vacuum cleaners. And maybe some moms are out there going, yes, really frequent ear infections, sleepwalking, horrible nightmares, and this from a little guy. Right. And even to the point, and very exhaustive tantrums, to the point that when he was 4 years old, I remember after one of his 2-hour-plus tantrums, these are not toddler tantrums, he was just exhausted, and he was cuddling against me, and he said, Mom, I just want to be a 0. I don't want to be anymore. And you go to the parenting manual, like what to expect from your preschooler, and you don't expect that conversation. There's nothing that prepares you as a mom. And so, I was in with my pediatrician. I was asking questions. I was just getting down. This happens to a lot of moms. By the time we got to school with kindergarten, I couldn't be shut down anymore because I was not the only one who was experiencing and witnessing these issues with Eric's behavior. And that's where my journey really started in terms of the diagnosis roulette, which is, I think a lot of moms will joke about that because it does. It feels like a roulette wheel, and you spin it, and this week it's ADHD, right. And so we'll try those meds. And, 6 months from now, it's going to be oppositional defiant disorder, and then maybe intermittent explosive disorder. We had an autism spectrum diagnosis twice. It gets really frustrating because all of these things are very different. And all you want to know is, how do I help my kid? Right? My child's suffering. How do I help my suffering child? And nobody seems to have any answers for that question. Yeah. Okay. And I know you hear this at Federation of Families, and then you're told, well, you need to have your child arrested for his behavioral symptoms of a brain disease so that he can get mental health treatment. And you asked why I wrote the book. Really, for me, the defining social justice issue of our time is the criminalization of mental illness, not just for adults, which I think some of us are more aware of, knowing that the largest mental health treatment facilities in the United States are Rikers Island, Los Angeles County Jail, Cook County Jail. That's adults, but also for children. So some studies, I think the study I cited in my book is old, it's 2002, and it said that 65 to 75% of kids in juvenile detention had at least one mental illness. And new studies are saying more like 90%. Right. So if you're thinking about juvenile detention and what that looks like for a child, this is not a therapeutic environment for a child who has a serious mental illness. Not at all. It's a very frightening and traumatizing environment. In fact, one of my biggest frustrations, while it's true that we were able to access more services after Eric entered the juvenile justice system, one of my biggest frustrations is that while he has a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, he also has a PTSD diagnosis because of the trauma the system inflicted on him. Okay. That's ridiculous.
Right. So he ended up with PTSD to be able to access services.
Right. And that is not an uncommon story, right? It is not an uncommon story for people living with mental illness to say, the system actually traumatized me.
Well, at what age did he first go to detention? Because he was young.
3 weeks after his 11th birthday. Right. He was so small that they didn't even have clothes to fit him. It's this little scrawny kid in these huge sweatpants, and there's no drawstrings, so he has to hold them up all the time. It was, it was absurd. It was just absurd.
And it's not, and this is not just an Idaho issue. This is truly a national issue of trying to figure out, how do we serve kids? Because running them through the justice system is currently what the trend is, and it's not necessarily working well.
Yeah, even though my family was living it, the term school to prison pipeline, the research on that was chilling. As I did the research for my book on the school to prison pipeline, it's a thing, and it disproportionately affects low-income children and children of color. And I think this is really a civil rights issue that we need to address as a society. That are we willing to do this to our children? Are we willing to traumatize our children just because of a choice-stealing brain difference? They don't. This isn't a choice they're making with these behaviors. It's a behavioral disorder, right? So, I guess I know where I come down on this, and where Federation of Families comes down.
Prevention, intervention. So, any thoughts? Because in Idaho, we are working very hard.
Yes.
With the YES project, which is a Youth Empowerment Services project. That's a result of the Jeff D. lawsuit from back in 1980. Any thoughts or comments? Are you keeping up with that in terms of how that's going to impact things?
Eric actually keeps up with that more than I do. As you know, he's volunteered his time to be part of the process of making recommendations, and I was thrilled that he was asked because he's a child who's actually lived it. right? Lived all parts of our system of care here in Idaho, and so he's a very smart kid, and he's got some really good ideas. I, like most parents, I'm super hopeful about Jeff D, right? And also with a real grain of salt, like, well, I'll believe it, see it, and I think, that's the challenge. I'll say, even talking to moms across the country, a lot of well-meaning people, like you mentioned, extended family or, friends or whatever, will say, well, why can't you just send your child to a hospital to get better? And that was actually part of my own story. I don't know how many people know this, but because of Eric's violent behaviors, and because I shared, a judge in Idaho actually wrote a court ruling that you can look up that took my younger two children away, even though we were working with Child Protective Services and Department of Health and Welfare, until we could find residential treatment for Eric. That's the actual language in the order, that we need to place Eric in residential treatment. And a lot of us moms call that place Candyland. So, because it doesn't really exist. It certainly doesn't exist in Idaho. Right. So, that therapeutic care where I'd be able to be a part of my child's care, it's not possible here. It's not something that really exists. We have short-term psychiatric, acute psychiatric care here, especially in the Boise area, but we don't have anything longer term. Right. You have to send your child away. Out of state. Yeah. So I'm being asked to, I can keep one sick child or two well children. And no mom in America should. So how did that play itself out? How did that get resolved? Through settlement. So yeah, my situation was a little unique. I simultaneously think that parents should be very worried about talking. I shared this because I think you should be worried about talking. Parents will come to me and say, what are the consequences potentially? And I say, do you have other children? This is a potential consequence. I think it's a very unlikely consequence. My situation had, a few wrinkles that were unique to us, but yeah, ultimately we were able to get the court to appoint a psychologist to oversee what was best for all of the children, and that's like the psychologist determined that the children were fine together. But it took a long time.
The family was reunited.
Yeah, but it took a long time. Right. And that's if you really want to know the price of silence for me personally, that was it. But the price of talking, really. So it's a pretty heavy price. I would honestly, if I had to do it over again, I wouldn't have posted the blog, which is a sad thing, right? Here I am saying, advocate, share your story, but it wasn't an acceptable trade-off for me to lose a year with my younger two. Not acceptable.
There was, a high cost that you paid in not being able to predict that.
Nope. Right. And I do now, whenever parents come to me, I say, let's think through every possible thing. What's the worst thing that could happen? So yeah. And that makes me sad for you and your family. The benefit that the community, obviously you're well aware, has received is huge, because your being out there has really broadened the conversation and allowed for other parents to come in. But for you to have paid such a cost that you said, I don't know that I could have done it again. Well, honestly, I would not have had time to write the book if that was the year that I wrote the book. Yeah. The year I didn't have my younger two children, I had a book to write. So it was, in some ways, therapeutic for me to have a really intense project. That might be why the research is so heavy. It was, it was a way for me to cope. It was a coping strategy for me. So it was something painful. Yeah. So switching a little bit, can you talk a little bit about the importance of family involvement in your son's therapy? Because a lot of times, I know it's really frustrating for parents, because what they hear a lot is your child needs to go to therapy and there needs to be family therapy also. And parents kind of go, oh my gosh, we've been into so much therapy and it's not working. But a lot of it has to do with the right type of family involvement treatment to be able to get the results and to really build those relationships and to give parents the skills, because most parents don't know how to parent a child with such intense needs. So talk a little bit about kind of your involvement and what difference that made in your son's kind of recovery and where he is. Yeah, family involvement, especially family therapy, I think is really critical to success, not just for the family, but also for the child. And there's a lot of research on this, the outcomes, especially with serious mental illness, so especially in the area of schizophrenia, the outcomes for your child are so much likely to be better if there's family support, and it's the right type of family support, right? So not judgmental, but therapeutic, helpful. I do think mental illness is a whole family illness when you're dealing with these severe behaviors. It's something that affects everyone in the family. I mean, certainly my younger two children are still in individual therapy because of some of the things that they witnessed, and we have to be very sensitive always to safety. But the whole family therapy, I think is so important because we joke about it. You get a toolbox. I know that sounds silly, but you get a toolbox. Sometimes your family, your whole family, yourself included, you can develop some maladaptive coping strategies in the course of living through crisis situations, right? And so having a toolbox of good coping strategies is really important, even to the point where you would probably laugh in my house if Eric is ever escalating or something. Even Brandon might say, "Oh, Eric, go get your toolbox out." And it can be just that little joke that can kind of de-escalate or defuse the whole situation. And so all of us have those strategies. We've learned to be very conflict competent, I would say. We've learned just really to give ourselves timeouts more. Like sometimes I need a timeout as a mom, right? Safety is always the critical concern with a child who has violent behaviors. It's always safety first. But beyond safety, if the family's safe, you've got to take care of yourself too and know what your limits and your boundaries are. And so I really do believe, especially having worked with Eric for so many years, that he wants to be a good kid and he wants to self-regulate. And it's good for me to know. Even something as simple as don't back him into a corner. Even something as simple, this was surprising to me, when Eric is in a heightened state of awareness, the way I'm talking to you right now sounds like yelling. So I think I'm talking normally, but Eric thinks I'm yelling at him.
Right.
And that took therapy to learn that. That wasn't something that I just knew. How would I know that this sounds like yelling? So I can where I cannot talk at all, right? Until he's ready. So, there's a whole host. I highly recommend it, that the family go together. And also there's even sometimes specific therapy. Some of the moms will laugh about this. Okay, the biggest deal, Eric is okay if I share this story with you, but the biggest deal for me was when he wanted to drive. Okay, it was just this big thing. I did not want him to drive.
Right.
I did not feel safe about that. I did not have confidence in it. And he had been doing well for 2.5 years when he finally was 3 years when he wanted to do driver's ed. He kept asking, and not this semester, or I don't know. And finally he's like, Mom, what is the deal? Why don't you want me to drive? And I thought about that, and I realized that we needed to go to a therapy session with his therapist so I could talk to him about it. And I had an incident where he'd gotten violent in the car when he was much younger, and it was triggering for me, the thought of him driving. I didn't feel 100% confident, and I needed to be able to share that in a way that he could understand my concerns. And once we worked through that, he went to driver's ed. He's a great driver. So go figure, But it was me. It was really me. I was the barrier there. And I think it's okay to say that, I still, it's a whole family illness. I still have some reactions, some responses, and he's been really forgiving and working with me through that. So,
And it seems like it's an important process. And I guess what I would really encourage parents, if they're feeling like they're going back into family therapy and it's not working, is that they need to continue to look for other places to be able to get the type of support that really helps. Because part of it, is the skill building, as opposed to the deep, family therapy, sitting and just kind of talking back and forth, which is an element of it that's important.
Sure.
But the developing skills, and so is to look. To do some research, to have some conversations, but to find a place that you are getting your needs met, as opposed to, I don't want to participate anymore, is let's find a service that works for you. Because there's a lot of different things. And I think in the book you mentioned, several different types, if it's family preservation and functional family therapy. And
and some things are going to work better for some families than others, depending on the dynamic that you already have or where you are in your journey as a family. We found that the communication piece was really important for us. Like even the thing I told you about Eric thinking I was yelling. And there's just very specific things you can learn to de-escalate your child, which, and again, I have to say this because I know there's some moms out there. I know, like with my son, something's worked. If what I'm saying doesn't work for you, that's not your fault, right? Every kid's different. And I know, because it took me so long to find something that worked with Eric, I totally understand that you may have tried all this stuff. Maybe it's not working for your kid. And so that's exactly what you said, Carol. Just don't give up. There's probably something else out there. It can just feel so soul crushing when the latest diagnosis or the latest medication doesn't work. Or even worse, when something works for a little while and then stops working. That was Eric's real problem. Sometimes things would feel like it was working and then it would stop. It can just feel so hard, right? I really think the research is escalating in this area. I think we're going to have better solutions. But if what I'm saying doesn't work for you, like, that's not you, right? It's not your fault. It's not your child's fault. just keep trying. I think that's really a good message. You know, if we got an opinion from our primary care doctor we didn't like, we'd probably blow it off and get a second opinion. But so often in psychiatry, if we get an opinion we don't like, we say, well, they don't know anything, I'm done.
Yeah.
Right? And like you said, keep trying, find the right fit.
Yeah.
So,
and I think the issue of blame, I think that's, and you mentioned this a little while ago, is really getting to the point where, one, you're not blaming yourself.
Don't blame yourself. Yeah.
But if you're feeling blamed by others, particularly in kind of a therapeutic environment, or is that you need to step away from that and find someone who is supporting you as a parent.
No, that's not therapeutic. Blame and shame and all that, not therapeutic. Not at all. So if that's the place where you are, it's probably time to step back from that place.
Yeah, because the system does it feels like there's a lot of blaming on the parents, be it through all the variety of systems that parents are involved in.
I just have to say, I love the parenting program Love and Logic that we use here in Idaho for parents like me. So if your child is sent to juvenile detention, you're going to be taking court-ordered parenting classes. I'm a court-ordered parenting ninja. I've taken Love and Logic so many times. It's great. It's actually a great book. I'm not dissing that program. I didn't learn a single thing in that program that helped me with a child who had a biologically based brain difference. Not a single tool in there for my neurologically atypical child.
Right. So did you do Love and Logic or Love and Limits?
Both.
Okay.
So Love and Limits is the teen one, and Love and Logic is the kid. I was right on the cusp, because when he first went in, he was 11, so we did Love and Logic, and then
jumped
subsequent
up to Love and
times
Limits.
we got to go to Love and Limits. And it's a great program, right?
Right.
It's great. But the problem is when you're dealing with a manic bipolar rage, the idea of logical consequences is not applicable to that situation whatsoever. So you need a toolkit that's more designed for your child.
So that idea of individually creating treatment plans and programs based on the needs of the family and child.
And a safety plan based on the needs of the family. Yeah. Safety plans are important. They really are.
Okay. And to me, that's an element of the yes. As that moves forward, is that idea is that there will be child family teams, wraparound teams, developing plans specific for the family and the kids, as opposed to trying to take one well-designed program, evidence-based program, and putting everyone into
a box. Yeah. No, and I mean, even early on, because I did partner with Child Protective Services, knowing what was going on in my family. We had violent behaviors, and I wanted all my children to be safe, and so I partnered very early with them, invited them into my home, sought their opinions. But some of us joke a little bit, and I will say I've felt this way sometimes. If you just show up with a sticker chart, honest to goodness, I've thought of that. I've thought of the sticker chart. Yeah. Right? Like I probably need something more than the sticker chart, right?
Something more substantial.
Yeah, something more than a sticker chart, because I probably tried that one already.
Tell me you get my kid, and then let's work together.
Exactly. Partner, and I think that idea of individualized for the family, for the child, even just for the specific circumstances that Emily is facing, because we didn't really talk about it, but in some ways, my situation, I was an extremely fortunate parent. I had an employer who I could go to and say, hey, I need a flexible schedule. And I could take that flexible schedule. I was providing for my children, trying to work and trying to manage all these appointments and court-ordered appointments and all this stuff. And I can understand why some parents can't work. I can. And I think the society is really judgmental about that. Like, oh, why aren't you working? Well, I spend 30 hours a week just trying to get my child care.
Yeah.
I wish in some ways we could acknowledge the role of caregivers as case managers. Moms in a lot of cases here are case managers. They're doing work for the system. Right. But it's unpaid, it's unacknowledged, it's
it's exhausting.
It's exhausting. It is exhausting.
So let me send you this one. This is a question I had told you about in advance that came from a friend of mine who has an adult child who has been struggling for years and has felt definitely underwater because of the pressure, again, trying to find the right resources, and not being able to reach a point of stabilization.
Right.
Living in this, where, if possible, is it? So I think my question is finding balance a utopian term for parents of kids with really complex needs? Does it exist? And the importance of what could it look like? What are some of the elements that you could put into your life to try? Because there's definitely like the idealistic, I would love to be able to go take a long weekend ski vacation. That's not going to happen.
Probably not going to happen.
So where do you find some balance? How do you nurture yourself? What suggestions would you have?
So many thoughts on that. And when you told me about this question, I was like, take time for yourself. That's what people always will tell you, right?
Yeah.
Like, make sure you're taking time for yourself. And you're like, right.
Self-care is like taking care. What is like what they tell you in the airplane before you buckle the infant in?
You need to put the mask on yourself, right?
Yeah,
You've
right.
got to put your own mask on before you put someone else's on. Okay, first of all, I have to say this is actually a true statement. You do have to find some way to take care of yourself. That's true.
Yeah.
The idea of balance, though, I think, your friend's situation speaks to what a lot of parents are going through, which is that really your life can be very chaotic and unpredictable, right? And it's that chaos and unpredictability that has led, I think I cited one study in the book that said moms of kids with autism have stress levels that are similar to soldiers in combat. And this has been shown time and time again. So when you're talking about balance or self-care or all of that, we're not talking about a pretty meme on a Facebook page. We're talking about some pretty significant levels of stress that you're probably experiencing. And for myself, I will tell you what I did. First and foremost was therapy for myself, which I know may not be the most popular answer, but I continue even, like I mentioned, I went with Eric to his therapy session. I continue to use a personal therapist because sometimes I just need somebody to de-stress with, right? I just need someone to de-stress with. It's very stressful and not knowing from one minute to the next if your child's going to be okay or if it's going to be a crisis situation. It's that not knowing piece. Like I almost wonder if you were in continual crisis, maybe that would be easier, right? But sometimes things can go great for a long time and then you go into crisis again and you reach that point where you're like, I'm not actually going to know, which is why I talked about enjoying the present tense in the book. So self-care, for me, therapy. I've used yoga in the past. You can even do that at home. There's yoga you can do, and the breathing actually works. That's why I like yoga. Yoga breathing can really calm down your parasympathetic nervous system. Even something as simple as taking a hot bath with some nice Epsom salts. But you have to take time to breathe. I also enjoy reading fiction. So when I can do it, sometimes it'll take me half a year, but I will dive into a really good fiction book, and that's my 5 minutes a day that I get to kind of escape the world.
Right.
So whatever you do, it's got to be something, right?
And I think that's the key, is that you need to be doing something. And I think moms are very self-sacrificing.
Oh, yeah.
So the sense that we go all in for the idea of saving our child, and we will give up everything. But in the long run, when we burn ourselves out,
there's nothing left for your child if you don't have something for you. And it's so important. Even though, again, I totally laughed when you asked me the question. I'm like, well, balance, yeah. What is that balancing act you're doing, right? It's like you're standing on a rubber ball trying to hold a statue, and you need like 6 arms, and then maybe you could balance all the things you're doing.
It sounds like really there's not really balance. So that may not be a great word, but the idea that there does need to be some self-care, then does need to be nurturing yourself.
But I would say be most in tune with the stress. Right? Maybe I'm the type of person who will really push stress down. Like, no, I'm not stressed. No, I'm not stressed. And if I do that and I don't pay attention to my stress levels, that can bubble up and explode, sometimes in strange ways. And so I think, acknowledging that this is a stressful situation and I need to pay attention to myself. That's part of the reason I go to therapy, to help with my own toolkit, right? What's my toolkit to manage myself?
Yeah.
So
in terms of organizations that are here, like within the Treasure Valley, but also statewide and nationally, is one is the Federation. But also, tell us about NAMI, because NAMI has some really important educational programs targeted towards family members that would be beneficial.
So I'm the current board president for the National Alliance on Mental Illness here in Boise, and I really love NAMI. It's one of the oldest grassroots family and peer-driven organizations, so families and peers partnering together, which I think is great. Traditionally, we've focused more on older kids, so and older people. So we have family support groups. If you have an adult child who's going through mental illness, we've got peer support groups, which are fantastic. We have education classes, all this free to the community. And we have a new program that I'm excited about, specifically targeted at parents of kids who show symptoms by age 13, so kids like my son. And that's called the NAMI Basics program. I'm one of the teachers here in Boise. So we only have, I think, 72 basics programs in the United States right now. So Boise is one of the first areas to actually offer this program. And I would love it if you're interested and you're watching the webinar, or if you're a provider and you know of a family, we're doing an interest list right now to start our fall classes. So please get in touch with us at manager@NAMI Boise, or you can get in touch with me and I will add you to the list, and then we'll let you know more about the schedule as it goes. But I have to say, having done the training for the basics program, It's so much stuff I wish I'd known. As I was going through the hardest times with Eric, there was so much good information in this class. So I'm really glad that we have that opportunity for parents here in the Boise area.
And I mean, it's not a short little 2-hour overview. I mean, it's a pretty in-depth. I mean, if you were able to make the commitment for the entire program,
exactly,
what you walk away with is a really solid foundation for better understanding all aspects of mental illness and kind of how to, as a parent,
and resources. Like we bring Idaho Federation of Families in, we bring Idaho Parents Unlimited in. It's so hard when you're in the middle of all this to know where to go for help. Right. And just knowing like that Federation of Families exists, I wish I'd known earlier. You know, I felt like I was doing so much on my own, and the more you connect with people and the more you connect with information, the better chances you'll have of managing the whole situation for your family. So.
Yeah, so we would encourage families that if you are out there and struggling on your own, is definitely connect with the Federation.
Yes.
Take Liza's advice, look in terms of what NAMI has to offer, when their programs are starting. Again, like IPOL. But I think it's through those connections that families really be able to kind of get a foundation underneath of them.
Right.
And also with the idea of connecting to other parents that are in similar situations.
So important.
That to me has been, when I talk to parents, is having that support of someone who understands the experience and not feeling so isolated.
Right. Yeah. And I will say, you know, that decision to put my name in my story, because I blogged anonymously when I initially wrote that blog post, like a lot of people writing about mental illness, then I was blogging anonymously. And that decision, it really came down to a conversation with a friend. And he said, you know, Liza, you're the last mom in Boise that people would think is going through this. You know, and maybe because I'm a soccer mom. I blog as the anarchist soccer mom, and I'm just a soccer mom. I'm that mom who does art with your kids in elementary school, and you know, I teach college. I'm a college professor. I'm that mom, right? You know, and with the minivan and the whole 9 yards. And my friend Nate said, you know, you're just not the person people would expect who's going through this, and I think to me that was like an aha moment. I thought, well, if I'm not the person people expect, maybe there are a lot of moms out there. Maybe there are a lot of moms, and maybe they are just as frustrated as I am, and maybe they're just as scared and hopeless. And you mentioned there's a lot of hope in the book. I didn't start from a place of hope. That was from making those connections, finding other people, hearing, like seeing stories of success and recovery. All of that was what gave me hope.
Well, to me, sometimes it is the person in front of you that has already been down your path and has gotten further into their journey, and that's what you hold on to. Because where you stand right now, you don't see it. And I mean, like, again, back to that whole alphabet soup of diagnoses and all the different medicines, and you were like, I'm not seeing it, but...
And we didn't even talk about the schools, right? Oh my goodness, you think the medical world's hard, and then you're getting into IEP meetings, and what? I have no idea what's going on. You know, you have to become an expert in so many different systems, and you're still maybe trying to parent your child who's sick, and your other children, and maybe hold down a job, and it just becomes this overwhelming thing. So finding people who already know what all those letters mean, that could be super helpful.
Right. Well, and I think they kind of pull you through sometimes. Because you've got to hold on to something, and if it's just the idea that somebody else has made it to the other side,
or understands, or even just understands. I also always tell moms, if you come find me on Facebook, I have an author page. That's the one that, for some reason, I only get those messages. I don't get, Facebook's weird. I don't get my messages if you, message my private page. But if you message the one with the little blue check mark, whatever that means, I usually get those messages right away. And I can connect with you and put you in some secret groups. We've got secret support groups on Facebook.
So what is a secret support group?
Well, you can't know unless you have to knock on the door and have the password.
How do you find out? So
you
just
contact
said...
me.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you can connect people to groups that have similar challenges and provide support.
Yeah, they've been huge for me, huge to be a part of these groups. They do have pretty strict rules that start with all this no judging stuff. You know, these are not forums where you're going to go in and say, well, I am a great mom because this worked for me. It's just a place where you can share. You know, just be really real and share. And there's some hard stories out there. So for me, that's been one of the best parts of the journey, is connecting with all these other advocates. I didn't even know were there. I've been able to make friends across the United States. I've met some amazing amazing, inspiring people, both people living with mental illness and other parents. So it's been an incredible journey to find out we're not alone.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay. Yeah. So thank you for sharing that, because I just recently found out about like these closed secret groups, and I was like, that's so interesting.
Yeah, they're helpful.
I would encourage anybody who could use some connection is definitely check in with Liza. Let her help you connect to a group.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like they're both here in Idaho. They're across the country.
Yeah,
I mean, you're talking to
nationally.
people. Okay.
Nationally. Yeah,
Okay.
you would really be surprised. So,
Awesome.
Yeah.
So one of the other things that you touched on the group, and this kind of goes with what you were saying, is the toxic perfectionism.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that, and how do people get past?
Yeah, maybe that's just me. I don't know. Maybe that phrase resonates. I did not make up the phrase toxic perfectionism. It came from the work of sociologist Christine Doty, and she was looking specifically at the Latter-day Saint population in Utah County in some of her research, and she found that people could really just put so much pressure on themselves to appear perfect, to have this perfect appearance, that it was just really devastating to their mental health, right? And this definitely plays into what families are dealing with. If you have a child who has behavioral symptoms of a brain difference,
right,
you're definitely not going to be that perfect family, right? And so, I explored in the book in some ways the way that communities can maybe change our expectations for families and kids, but specifically religious communities. And one person I could direct all of you to would be Rick Warren and his wife, Kay Warren. Rick Warren wrote The Purpose-Driven Life, and I think they're the Saddleback Church pastor and his wife. Their son actually died by suicide, and they've become passionate advocates for this exact problem of, we don't need perfectionism in the church anymore. We need real, right? We need a safe space. We need a welcoming space. We need to help people overcome this idea that we have to look perfect all the time, but to allow that place where people can be themselves and ask for the help they need. So if anyone's interested in learning more about that, I love the work that Kay and Rick Warren have been doing on the role of the church in general, like all churches really, in embracing and providing community, especially for families who are going through mental health crisis.
Okay.
Yeah, but for me, myself, any mom who's listening, just give it up. The kids do not need to be wearing matching socks. It's just, it's not a thing. Right? I wore mismatched shoes on Monday. So for toxic perfectionism, you just have
it's
to be
like
real.
living real. It's being allowed to be who you are, who your family is, which kind of I would think would bring some of that stress level down to not have to be protecting, trying to create an image. And I think society in general does that with just the way that we push out our advertising, our ideas of the goals that we're working towards, and they're unrealistic.
Well, we were even joking about that. Like I've done some television shows, right? And I was joking with Carol beforehand, they'd do an hour and a half of makeup on me, right? So I wouldn't even recognize myself when I was on television.
Yeah.
I'm like, who is that woman? Oh, okay. And I think that understanding that life isn't like it always looks to everybody else, and that's okay. Really freeing yourself from those expectations can be very liberating. Another great resource for this too, if you're looking for something to read, Brene Brown, her work on vulnerability is really, really powerful. And it definitely, I think, has specific applications to moms and dads who are parenting a child with mental illness. The idea of letting yourself be vulnerable and feeling what you're feeling.
Right. And so that's another easy one to Google.
Yes,
because
Brene
Brown,
Brown,
a lot will pop up.
Yeah.
So encouraging people to, since we do have some things on the live chat,
cool.
so I am going to go ahead and read. We have one from Veronica, and it says, "We are in a vicious, violent cycle. Help. My 9-year-old was sent out of state to an RTC where he was traumatized more. I took him out after 2 months. Now we are starting all over with new therapists."
Veronica, yeah, that story is so sad, first and foremost, and unfortunately it's so common. And the real challenge, and Veronica highlights it, is access to care, right? And not just any old care, but therapeutic care.
And intensive community-based
therapeutic care. Veronica, you're doing the right thing to try to find a new therapist, like kind of like we were talking earlier, Carol, finding something that works for your family. But if you're struggling, yeah, you're not alone. I think the critical challenge for all of us, and we talked about Jeff D and all of that, is getting the community-based care that we were promised and not care that's traumatizing. I've heard that exact situation, and that was my son's case as well, where what's supposed to be helping actually traumatizes further. So yeah, that's just a tough one, and I hear stories like that every day. And the violent behavior, I caught a lot of criticism for talking about that, but I don't have a problem with talking about that. I don't think that we should force families to be silent about what they're experiencing. The violent behavior can be really, really draining and tough and scary on a family. And so, yeah, in terms of solutions, if you really can't handle it at home, then it does need to be residential care, and you need to fight for that. Yeah.
And again, the right care.
The right care,
Making
exactly.
sure that there's a program that meets the needs of your child.
But the challenge, I just find this heartbreaking in Idaho, is that that's going to be out-of-state care for us. It's not going to be in-state, and I don't feel like that's fair, I guess I'd say, that we would have to send our children away to get care.
Well, and just the challenge then of parents being able to participate in the treatment. Because I think if your child is out of state doing a lot of work, and then if you're just doing the weekly phone calls, and it's hard when they come back to really be able to understand what they've done, be able to speak the language, to be able to support the program and the work that was done. So to be able to bring it closer to home.
That continuity is so important. You know, I saw a mental health hospital when I was in Cincinnati. This was the Lindner Center of Hope, and this care center was amazing. It was for children and young people, and if you'd gone there, I was just like, why can't we have this right in Boise? It was a longer term place, but everything was structured around a fireplace, a community kitchen where there were fresh baked cookies all the time. There were guitars out for the kids to play on, art supplies. A nurse's station, but it didn't look all, not the green walls and the barbed wire fence and all that. It was just this lovely place. And I thought, and my favorite part of it was open access to the parents at all times. So there was even a cot in the child's room, just like we would have if the child had cancer. We'd have a cot in the room for the parent to be there. Anytime you wanted to be there with your child, you could be there. That's not the case here in Idaho. We don't have that. We have just what you described, weekly phone calls or rare visits. And I don't feel like that's treating the whole family.
Right. And what I think to me is challenging, kind of heartbreaking, is to have families like Veronica, in terms of her needs are immediate, and to be able to say, you know what, if you can just hang on a couple of years, put your kid on an ice cube, because I know what is coming is very much with those intensive community-based services, is that idea of bringing people into the home to be working with parents on developing skills, how to stabilize a child in the home, wrap around some really intensive services, be it different things through the school, programs after school, additional therapy, so that we're going to be able to keep kids in the home with enough services packed in that we're not going to be sending them out of state.
Right.
But that, between now and when we reach that point, how do we support the families that are in crisis right now? Because Veronica's saying is that the violent behavior is the biggest problem.
It is. It is. And the real challenge, this all leads into this social justice issue, is that really the only end solution we have for violent behavior in our society right now is incarceration.
Right.
That's the solution we have. And I'm sure it's an unacceptable solution to Veronica with her 9-year-old child. It was an unacceptable solution for me with my 11-year-old child, and yet there was no other option. And for me, one of the most heartbreaking parts of my family's journey, honestly, during that time, the only time I personally felt safe was when Eric was in juvenile detention. I felt safe. That's not fair.
The other time, it sounds like you were sleeping with one eye open and kind of your foot on the floor, because ready to go at any moment.
Yeah, ready to go at any moment, kind of in fight or flight myself. And that's so unfair. And we could do so much better by these kids. The other thing, too, I don't know what the diagnosis is in this case, but if you're in that diagnosis roulette, I had to take Eric out of state, again, to see Dr. Papoulis to get him diagnosed with bipolar, and that really was the magic bullet for us. I'm not saying that is for every family. It's a pretty rare diagnosis for kids, but keep fighting for that diagnosis, whatever the right diagnosis is for your child, because I've seen it happen, not just with my son, but finding the right therapeutic care can really make all the difference. But it's a hard fight, especially in Idaho.
So, Veronica, give us a call at the Federation when you have an opportunity, and let's see if we can connect you some other places that might be able to provide some of the services that you're looking for.
It's heartbreaking, and it's unfortunately way too common. This exact situation. And again, we're not seeing it as a whole family illness, right? We just don't have those solutions for families right now. But we will.
We're moving that way. We're excited.
Yeah, thanks to all your hard work with the Federation. Yeah.
So tell us, I think we've just got a couple of minutes left. What is Eric doing now? Where, as much as you feel comfortable in what Eric would be comfortable with, but again, that sense of hope for everything that you have gone through, that Eric has plowed through. Where is he now?
Well, Eric is a junior at Sage International. He is planning on college. He's really active as a mental health advocate, as you know, because he's been helping out with the Jeff D stuff that we mentioned earlier. I think he's the chair of Youth Moves, the advocacy group.
Okay.
The advocacy group for teens in the area that work with mental illness. He loves Youth Moves. He loves that community that he's built. He gave a TEDx talk in Boise last year, and you have to find it under a different last name. I know it's 2017. Kids can have different names to their moms. So it's Eric Walton, and I highly recommend that you Google that TEDx talk. I know I had a hard time getting through it without crying as a mom, but he's just really gone out there, and he's really advocating for change.
Yeah, he's definitely a leader within the youth community of going public with kind of the anti-stigma campaign and really supporting other youth and kind of being a force within our community. So we're excited because when I see him working on several of the committees that I'm involved with, I mean, he's outspoken and his voice is strong because he has lived the experience that we're talking about changing.
Every part of this experience he's lived, and I'm really glad that people ask. I think that's an important part of the solution is to ask kids like Eric. What could we do better for you? I mean, there's plenty of things, but he definitely has some ideas about how the system could have managed his experience better.
Right.
So I think it's an important part of the conversation. I know it's hard, especially for moms who are right in the trenches, like Veronica. When you're right in the trenches, it's so hard to see that there might be a day where you can have these conversations. But don't give up hope. Don't give up hope. That's the one thing you have to hang on to.
Yeah. Well, and again, your story, I think, does create a sense of hope for a lot of parents who are in the thick of it right now. So I applaud your willingness to be out there for the public, to share your story, and for your son to take on his role that he is doing is, to thank Eric also for being there and for representing a lot of the kids who don't feel like they have a voice at this point in time.
Right. No, we hope it becomes a thing where everyone can talk, right? But it's got to be more than talk. We've got to provide the access to care. That's really where we're at this point now.
Right.
We can't just talk. We have to do something.
Okay. So, Liza, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Loved having you here.
It was great.
Thank you all for joining us for our March webinar. We look forward to April. Angela Lindig, who is the Executive Director of Idaho Parents Unlimited, she's going to come and present on the topic dealing with kind of transitional age youth as they're moving from children's services into adult services, and she is well versed in that topic. So please join us again in April, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you.